Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name?
Matthew McCabe, M-C-C-A-B-E,
And where do you live, sir?
Canton, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived in Canton?
I'll be 20 years this coming June.
And during the time that you have lived in Canton, have you lived at the same place or have you lived at different places?
Different places.
So where do you live currently? How long have you lived there?
Currently, I will be 10 years this June.
And where did you live prior to that?
Prior to that, you want the physical address?
Yes.
15 Sutcliffe Ave. I was there for 10 years as well.
And with respect to both locations, who, if anyone, you live with?
I live with my wife and my 4 daughters.
And what is your wife's name?
Jennifer,
And how long have you and Jennifer McCabe been married? 22, so 23 years in August. And you have 4 daughters, is that right?
That's correct.
And how old are you?
I'm 49.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, my daughters?
That's okay. Your daughters, how old are your daughters?
20, 18, 16, and 15.
And your oldest daughter is Allie McCabe, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you work, sir?
Yes, I do.
What do you do for work?
I work for a information technology solutions firm.
And how long have you been doing that?
2009. So I think I'm coming on 15 years.
And does your wife work?
No.
What does your wife do?
Stay at home, raises the kids. Homemaker.
If I could turn your attention to January 28th into January 29th of 2022. Do you recall those days?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall what days of the week it is?
Friday into Saturday.
And did you work that day on the Friday?
Yes, I did.
And at that point, do you recall, were you working in an office or remotely?
I don't recall if that specific day I was in the office. Sometimes I'd go in, sometimes I'd work from home. So I don't recall if I actually was physically in the office. Sometimes I'll go in for a few hours. So I don't recall exactly if I was home or in the office that day.
So regardless, at some point, you sort of wrap up work for the day, and where did you go?
Yes, finished up work and met some friends at a restaurant in Canton before my daughter's basketball game.
And so on that evening, your daughter had a basketball game, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And who did she play for at that time?
She played for Canton High School.
Is that the varsity game?
Yes.
And which of your daughters, as far as age is concerned, which of your daughters was playing basketball for Canton High School at that time?
That would be my second oldest, who's
I'm sorry, go ahead.
my second oldest.
And so you, after work, had met some other people at an establishment in Canton, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Where did you go?
The establishment was called the Canton Junction Pub or Canton Junction. I don't know the full name, but just went by the Junction.
And who, if anyone, did you meet there, just in general?
Handful of folks that play whose daughters play basketball on the same team with my daughter.
So just sort of a group of parents who had kids on the basketball team?
Yes, that's correct.
And was your wife Jennifer there with you at that time as well?
Yes, that's correct.
And about how long were you at the junction?
Game 6:30. Give or take hour and a half.
And girls varsity basketball, was there sort of like a typical time that that game would start or a game would be scheduled for them?
Yes.
And what time was that, Jennifer?
Typically 6 or 6:30 would be the normal time. I don't remember if it was a 6:30 start that night or Actually, I think it was a 6:30 start, but typically 6 or 6:30.
So sometime around 6 or 6:30, you make your way over to the high school, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in that, I mean, was this a home game, a road game, if you recall?
That evening, it was a home game.
Do you recall anything about the game as far as who they were playing, or if they won, or anything like that?
Yes, it was. They were playing the town of Foxborough High School, and they did not win. They went into overtime and lost.
Now, with respect to your wife, Jennifer, as the kids were growing up, what if any relationship did she have as far as with respect to the kids in basketball?
It's grown as like the youth years. Jennifer was a basketball coach and coached throughout the years. Coached a couple of my daughters.
So she coached, and with respect to the daughter that was playing at the high school game that night, was that one of the daughters that she had coached?
Yes, that's correct.
So fair to assume she had also coached several of the girls that were on the varsity basketball team with your daughter, correct?
Yes, a few of them. Yes.
Now, when you get to Canton High School to the basketball game, is there sort of a typical area where you would sit or people you would congregate with while you're watching the game?
Yes, we'd sit up in the bleachers. Usually, the parents from the home side would tend to sit in the same area.
So you sit there, you watch the game. Game is over, and then what is sort of the plan from there, or where do you go?
After the game, I drove my younger two daughters back home.
So your whole family was there for the game, is that correct?
My wife and my two younger daughters. My older daughter was there. She wasn't with us, but she was there as well.
She was a student at Canton High School at that time as well?
Yes, she was.
So she's sitting with the other students, is that correct?
Yes, I'm assuming. I don't recall where she sat, but most likely with the other students.
So you drove your two daughters home, and then where did you go from there?
After dropping my daughters off, my wife and I proceeded to the Waterfall in Canton Center.
And do you recall what you were just in one vehicle when you left the house and went to the junction and went to the high school game, back to the house and to the Waterfall? Was it the same vehicle?
Yes, we were in the same vehicle.
And do you recall what kind of vehicle it was or whose vehicle it was?
It was the family vehicle. It was my wife's vehicle. I don't know, what was it? I don't know if it was a Suburban or a Yukon. I forget what brand it was.
Some kind of SUV? Is it?
Yes, a large SUV.
And why did you go to the Waterfall?
We went to the Waterfall. My wife informed me that her sister was at the Waterfall with her niece and a few other people, and we went to go meet them. My understanding, it was my nephew's birthday, either that day or the day after, and they were going to meet out at the Waterfall for his birthday.
And just to be clear, as far as who we're talking about, your wife's sister, what's her name?
Nicole Albert.
And is Nicole married?
Yes, she is.
And what's her husband's name?
Brian Albert.
And the niece that you're talking about that was out there with your sister-in-law, what's her name?
Her name is Caitlin Albert.
And the nephew of yours whose birthday it was or was going to be, what's his name?
His name is Brian as well.
So essentially Brian Albert Jr., even if he's not.
Yes, I believe he's a junior, yes.
Now, with regard to the basketball parents and the other people that you had been with at the junction and then at the game, what, if any, communication was there amongst sort of the basketball parents that evening or any other?
Yes, so we had a group text with the basketball parents, a handful of us, where after some of the games, we would meet up afterwards. This evening, I know Jen or I sent a text out saying where we were going, because we were obviously meeting her sister, and a few of the parents responded where they were going. We kind of split up, except for one couple decided to meet us at the Waterfall out of that group text.
And the couple that decided to meet you at the Waterfall, who were they?
That would be Nick and Karina Kolakisis.
When you arrive at the Waterfall, you and your wife, do you recall where it was that you parked in relation to the waterfall?
Yes, if you're looking at the front door of the waterfall, we were parked in the parking lot down the left.
And the waterfall sort of shares its parking lot or its establishment with a condo complex, is that correct?
That is correct.
So you parked somewhere in that parking lot?
Correct. I parked in the parking lot, yes.
And when you came into the waterfall, who, if anyone, did you see there, and where did you go?
When we walked into the waterfall, we identified where Jen's sister and their party was sitting.
And where were they sitting in relation to the waterfall?
When you walk in the front door, I believe there's 3 long tables that are set up. We passed, they were in the 3rd table, long table closest to the bar. Across from, there was also a band. They were right across from a little band.
There was a live band there as well.
Yes, there was.
Now, prior to you and your wife entering into the waterfall, you recall what, if anything, you did, or who, if anyone, you were talking to in the parking lot?
Yes, on the car ride from my house to the waterfall, and while I was in the parking lot, I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone.
And do you recall just generally what the conversation was about?
Yes, I do.
And what was it about?
It was about my daughter, my oldest daughter, Allie, who we mentioned. It was about her hockey team and her hockey coach. I was talking to one of the hockey coaches.
And when you were talking to this person, this is inside the car, is that correct?
That is correct.
And despite it being sort of your wife's car, was your phone hooked up to the speakers? Did you have a Bluetooth or anything like that?
I don't know if I connected mine to the Bluetooth or not. I don't recall if I was connected to the Bluetooth or not. I know my phone connects, so possibly. I don't know for sure if it was 100% connected that evening.
Now, with respect to it being your wife's car, is there, when both of you are in the car, is there sort of a default as to which of your phones would connect to the Bluetooth, yours versus hers?
If look at it that way, it would be my wife's because it was her car.
So the car would probably recognize her device over your device, correct?
That is correct.
Now,
Actually, I started the call definitely on my phone because my kids were in. I was on the call for a while, so I think I had my kids still in the car when I was dropping them off. So I wouldn't have them listening to the call. So I must have been on, again, I don't remember, but I must have been listening on my, holding it in my hand.
and when you come into the waterfall, do you recall about what time that was?
9 o'clock, give or take a couple minutes.
And again, you come over to a table closest to the bar, and who's in the group when you get there?
When we arrived, it was Nicole, Caitlin, Caitlin's boyfriend, Tristan, Chris Albert, and Julie Albert. We were also joined by Nick Kolakisas, who I mentioned. I just don't remember if Nick was already in or if Nick walked in right after me, but Nick and I, we got there similar times. I just don't know if he was already sitting in the bar or standing there when I walked in, or if he came in right after. Oh, and Jen, obviously.
And to be clear, people that were with you at this high top table in this sort of group, either then that you're talking about or throughout the course of the evening, these were people that were either sort of family or friends of yours or your wife's?
Oh, yes, that's correct. Yeah, family and friends, correct.
And so whether or not you and Mr. Kolakithis came in at the same time or slightly staggered, at some point he came in as well, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with respect, obviously you were out and you were at a bar, correct?
Yes.
And from what you recall, you were drinking and most, if not all, of the other people were drinking as well?
Yes, yeah, everybody at the table, to my recollection, was drinking.
And do you recall specifically what you were drinking on that night?
I do.
And what were you drinking?
I was drinking vodka with water and a splash of Crystal Light.
And is that would normally drink?
No.
And why were you drinking that on that day?
I was in a diet competition with other people in the town, so I was trying to stay away from any beer, which would be what I typically would drink.
And as far as your observations of the other people there throughout the course of the night, did you note anyone in your group, either at that time or subsequent in the night, to be sort of overly intoxicated or drunk or anything like that?
No. And
as far as the other people in your group, as far as drinking was concerned, at that time or any time later in the night, was their drinking sort of commensurate with the amount that you were drinking?
I wasn't paying attention to see who was drinking, how much they were drinking. I don't even know how many I had. Maybe at least 3, maybe 5. I don't know for sure. But give or take something there. But again, I wasn't paying attention to see if anybody was drinking faster than somebody else or et cetera.
And in that sense, sort of how long were you at the Waterfall that night?
Got there at 9 and left a little after 12, so a little over 3 hours.
So roughly 9 o'clock to about midnight or so, correct?
Yes, I recall leaving a little after midnight, correct.
Now, the initial group that you walked over to around the time that you got there, did that group expand or contract? Did people come or leave? Or can you explain sort of the order of that over the course of the evening?
Yes. Shortly after we settled in, Nick's wife showed up. Could have been 15, 20 minutes. I don't remember the exact time, but Nick's wife, Karina, came. And give or take 45 minutes, an hour after that, Brian Albert Sr. and Brian Higgins showed up. And around 11-ish, give or take, I don't know the exact time, Karen Reed and John O'Keefe showed up as well.
Let me ask you a little bit about some of those other, but let me ask first about, as far as Caitlin's boyfriend, Mr. Morris, how long was he there that night?
I don't recall how long he was there. I do know he left. He had mentioned something about working that evening. There was obviously a snowstorm coming in that evening, and he had mentioned that he was going to go home for a little bit before he had to go out and, I don't know if he was plowing or shoveling or doing something, but he was going to be going out that evening to plow, I believe.
And Christopher Albert and Brian Albert, they're brothers, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And Christopher Albert's wife is Julie Albert, is that correct?
Yes.
And she is also friends with your wife, Jennifer McCabe, correct?
Yes.
And been so for years, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yes, they've been friends for years.
Now, you mentioned someone by the name of Brian Higgins. Did you know Brian Higgins prior to that evening?
Yes.
I mean, how did you know him?
I had met Brian a few times, social settings. I recall meeting him at the Junction one evening. I believe I met him at a graduation party. I don't know how many times I met Brian, but I met him maybe 3, 4 times. I don't know exactly how many. So I knew who he was.
You knew who he was as far as he was friends or friendly with your brother-in-law, Brian Albert, correct?
Yes.
And that's how you knew him, was through Brian Albert?
Yes.
And do you know where Brian Albert Sr. and Brian Higgins had been prior to them coming to Waterfall?
Yes, I was informed that they were in New York, coming back from New York from a funeral of a New York police officer.
And both of them, as far as you knew, Brian Albert Sr. and Brian Higgins, they were in law enforcement, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that at some point around 11 or so, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed came into the Waterfall, correct?
Yes.
And just to be clear, when you speak of Karen Reed, that's someone that you had met prior to this evening as well?
Yes, that's correct.
And clarity purposes, for the record, do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Could you just describe as to where she's seated or an article of clothing?
She is seated at the table with her attorneys. You want me to describe her clothing?
If you could.
Black I don't know, sweater, I'm not sure, dress.
I just asked the record to reflect identification and by the way.
Yes.
Now, with regard to Mr. O'Keefe first, how was it that you knew Mr. O'Keefe?
I've met John O'Keefe when he started to be the caretaker for his niece and nephew after their parents had passed.
And specifically, you're referring to Patrick and Kaylee Furbush, is that correct?
That is correct.
So their mother and father tragically passed away, and Mr. O'Keefe then became their guardian, correct?
That is correct.
And when you met Mr. O'Keefe, is that when you were living at the house on Sutcliffe?
Yes.
And where was that house in relation to where Mr. O'Keefe initially lived with his niece and nephew?
A couple hundred yards. Two different streets. It's a neighborhood with multiple streets. My house was on Sutcliffe. Drive down Sutcliffe, maybe pass 1, 2, 3, 4 houses. Took a right, and that was John. That was the street that the kids lived on, maybe 4 houses up on the right.
And with reference to, you mentioned that you had 4 daughters, is that correct?
Yes.
And were any of your daughters around the same age as John's niece, Kaylee?
Yes, my third daughter is the same age, same grade as Kaylee.
And about this time that John had moved in his house, close to the house you were living on Sutcliffe, about how old was your daughter and his niece, Kaylee?
Ooh, I believe it was kindergarten. How old would you be in kindergarten? 7? I don't know.
I think kindergarten suffices. So fair
Okay.
to say they were very young, correct?
Yes.
And with reference to the kids, what, if any, beyond sort of being neighbors, what, if any, relationship did either you or your wife have with regard to Mr. O'Keefe and specifically his niece and nephew?
I'm sorry. Just the
Very
door.
long
I
question,
was trying to.
let me see.
No, the door was shaking, so I couldn't hear the end of it.
So around that time that Mr. O'Keefe moved in with his niece and nephew and took over guardianship of that,
Yes.
what, if any, relationship beyond being neighbors did yourself and or your wife have with respect to Mr. O'Keefe and the kids?
Oh, yeah, we had a good relationship, especially my wife. She was having the kids the same age, Kaylee and my daughter. She was very involved with helping him out, whether it's rides to various events. Throughout those years, I'd also coached Kaylee myself a couple times in soccer, and my wife also coached her in basketball. So play dates, things of that nature. Various times would go out with John, or he would meet up somewhere where we were. So a friendly relationship where, John was, in essence acting as a mother and a father. And so he'd do a lot of communicating through my wife in regards to needing help and things of that nature.
And in particular, his niece Kaylee and your daughter, who was around the same age, were they friends?
Yes, they were friends.
And about how close were they, particularly around that younger age?
They were very close in the young age. Kaylee would spend a lot of time at our house, spend a lot of time sleeping over. So they were very close.
And Kaylee in particular, was she, how close was she with your wife, Jennifer?
Kaylee was close with Jen. Kaylee was mature, well beyond the other girls in regards to she was bright, and she was very articulate, so she could have conversations with the adults much better than the other kids. Having 4 girls, she was a bright kid.
Now, at some point, Mr. O'Keefe and the kids moved from that house, and you also moved from the house on Sutcliffe, correct?
That is correct.
And do you recall the order of that? Was it you that moved first, or they that moved first?
I'm pretty sure I moved first. Yes.
And about how far away from the house on Sutcliffe was your new house?
It's right up the street, driving in a car, 2 minutes. I don't know, mile and a half. I'm not sure the exact distance, but not far away.
And where did John and the kids move?
They moved a little further away from, they're probably a couple miles away, 2.5, 3 miles. I don't know the exact distance. Not far. That side of town, everything's fairly close.
And specifically, they moved to a house on Meadows Avenue, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And the nature of your relationship, you and your wife's relationship with John and the kids and your daughter and Kaylee, did that sort of continue throughout after each of you moved from the original neighborhood?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the defendant, Ms. Reed, when was it that you first met her?
It's COVID 2020. We met her summertime of, I think it was the COVID year. I think it was 2020, summer.
Can you recall the circumstances of that or how you came to meet her at that time?
Yes, I do.
And could you explain to the jury what were the circumstances? Where did you meet her?
John had reached out to my wife, Jen. It was on a Saturday. I don't know if they connected that Saturday or the Friday, but they connected. John asked if he could come by the house with the kids. We have a pool, so he wanted to come by with the kids swimming and wanted to introduce Karen to us. Specifically wanted to introduce Karen to my wife, Jen.
You know why that was?
Yes, because they were dating, and he informed my wife that Karen had MS, and my wife has MS. So he thought it'd be good for the two of them to get to know each other, could have conversations with each other, obviously both suffering from MS.
How long has your wife suffered from MS?
I'm gonna say, I think she's been suffering for a while, but I'm gonna say her diagnosis, maybe 9 years. I don't remember the exact date. I'm gonna say about 9 years.
And so, Mr. O'Keefe, Ms. Reed, the defendant, and the two children came over to the house that day, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And about how often did you see Ms. Reed from that summer of 2020 until about the time of January 2022?
I would see her. There was a couple other times that John and Karen came by the house with the kids, and also see her at sporting events, whether it was soccer, whether it was basketball. Would see her at events, whether it was practices, picking somebody up. I would see Karen around.
And as far as you knew, or what, if anything, let me ask you this. As far as your relationship with Mr. O'Keefe, is someone he was dating or what was going on with someone he was dating's relationship, is that the kind of thing that the two of you would discuss?
You're asking John and I if he would. No, John and I don't recall ever having any conversations about his relationships with me directly.
And that applies to the defendant, Ms. Reed, and it applies to any other relationship you had while the two of you were friends, correct?
Correct.
Now, turning your attention back to the Waterfall on the evening of the 28th, when Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant come in, where is it that they went in relation to the group at the high top when they first came in?
They came in and immediately made contact with us, walked right over to our table.
And when they came over to the table, what if anything happened when they came over to the table?
Shaking hands, hugging. How you guys doing? Good to see you. Typical meet and greet when you see somebody that you're friends with.
And if you recall, was there a particular sort of side of the table, or where were you situated in relation to the table, and who, if anyone, was situated around you?
Yes, if I was to be looking at the table, long table, I spent most of the time at the end of the table, kind of in the corner, on the right side. Nick Kolakisis was right next to me. There was a wall. It's kind of thin. The table ends. There's a little space, and there's a wall right behind you. Nick was there. I was there. Jen, Karina were on this side most of the time. Brian and Brian were on the opposite side of the table, my recollection. I mean, there was obviously some movement around, but I spent most of the time again, if the table's coming across, standing on the end. I did sit down for a little bit, if I recall, but definitely on the edge of the long table.
Is it fair to say the Keithises didn't really know anybody at the table besides yourself and your wife?
Fair to say. They obviously knew who John was. They have a daughter as well, the same age as Kaylee. I don't know if they hung out with them, but fair to say that obviously it was my family and was there, Jen's family. So yes, I'd say in general, correct.
Now, sir, if I could ask, as far as Mr. O'Keefe was concerned, do you recall anything about what he was wearing that night?
I recall a baseball cap, and he tends to brim it over a little bit, and shirt and jeans. I don't know exactly what he was wearing.
Do you recall seeing him at any point in time with any kind of winter coat or heavy coat or anything like that?
Not that I recall. If he had one on, he had one on. I don't recall it.
And as far as his person, his features, what you could see, what, if any, injuries did you observe on him at that time?
I did not see any injuries.
And do you recall what John was drinking that night?
I believe he's drinking Bud Light beer.
Is that pretty typical for him?
Majority of times I saw John, yes, he was drinking Bud Light. I do recall when he came to my house for that first meet, he was drinking Bud Light Limes, which I thought was interesting, but it was at a pool, and maybe it was a summer drink for him, I'm not sure.
Fair enough.
I think I gave him a hard time.
Now, with reference to Miss Reed that night, what, if anything, did you observe her to be drinking or have?
She was drinking a clear liquid. I just assumed it was a vodka soda or vodka something.
And as far as the absent the Crystal Light, which I'll leave that alone for now, but absent the Crystal Light, was it similar to the drink that you were having that night?
Yes, could have been vodka water. Exactly, I don't know.
Now, do you know where the two of them, being Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant, do you know where they had come from prior to coming into the waterfall?
John had said they were came over from across the street from C.F. McCarthy's.
Now, let me ask you, as far as you were going to the waterfall, or your understanding was that it was your nephew, Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday, correct?
Yes.
And was he at the waterfall any time that you were there?
No.
And at some point, did you learn where he was?
Yes, I learned he was still home.
And was there any conversation, or do you know why he was still home?
My understanding was I thought we were waiting for him. He never showed up. My understanding was he chose to stay home. I had a couple friends over the house.
Now, from the time that you were in, the waterfall, how would you describe sort of the mood or the demeanor of sort of the group at large?
Everybody was just having a good time, hanging out, socializing, talking. As I said, there was a live band playing for a little bit, and just a normal evening.
And as far as the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were concerned, from what you could see or your observations, was there any sort of fighting or arguing or anything like that that you observed between the two of them over the course of the evening at the waterfall?
No, I did not.
You mentioned that you had left the waterfall sometime after midnight. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And before we get to that, over the course of the evening at the waterfall, did you have occasion to have conversation with either Mr. O'Keefe or the defendant?
Yes, I did.
And would that be both?
Yes.
And starting with Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, conversation, generally speaking, do you recall having with Mr. O'Keefe that evening?
I believe that night I think that night he was out because Kaylee, maybe they just got the acceptance from Kaylee. He was excited about her acceptance to what's the school? Bishop Fian, a local high school.
And that was something that you were aware of that she had applied for to get into that school, correct?
Yes.
And with respect to Ms. Reed, what, if any, conversations you recall in regard to her?
Normal conversation. She, hi, how you doing? Good to see you. she made a reference to myself asking how Jen and I do it. And I said, she was talking about with the 4 girls. How do we do it? How do you raise the 4 girls? You guys look happy. And I actually joked to her. I said, well, we're at a bar. Considering, it's obviously any marriage will tell you have your ups and downs. But brief, conversational, nothing of any substance. Just good to see you.
Now, this time that you're talking about that you're leaving shortly after midnight, is that around the time that sort of the bar was winding down for the evening?
Yes.
And the band that had been playing before, were they still playing, or had they?
No, they had stopped earlier, before 12. I don't remember the exact time, but they definitely stopped earlier. There were some people there, but our table was definitely the last table to wrap it up. Well, some people left before me, but the band was packing up packing up all their equipment.
And so in that vein, if you recall, can you tell the jury sort of the order of people from your group and when they left and things of that nature?
Yes. So Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, and Nicole were packed up, leaving before us. Then my wife, Karen, Karina, John and Chris, they started leaving before us. I think John was delayed, but they walked out, and Nick and I were the last 2 at the table. I recall us picking up some of the empty glasses and beer bottles, and because I said the bar was right behind us, so I recall picking up the glasses and some of the bottles and bring them to the bar, as well as a couple of the members of the band were sitting on the edge of the bar, and just some brief conversation with them. Good job, guys coming back, things of that nature. And then Nick and I walked out.
Now, over the course of the evening at the Waterfall, while you were there, what, if any, conversation was had amongst the group in regard to any plans or where to next, or where people were going after the Waterfall?
Yes. As mentioned, thought we were going to meet my nephew. He didn't come out. We found out he had a few friends at the house. When Brian and Nicole were leaving, they had mentioned that Brian was at the house with a couple friends, and we were welcome to come back and have a celebratory drink for his birthday. So he had extended an invite to the table, like, hey, who's ever around, wants to come back, you're welcome.
So that was sort of extended to the entirety of the group, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so what was your understanding, at least as far as your plan, you and your wife, Jennifer, when you were leaving the Waterfall?
That we'd be stopping by Brian and Nicole's house.
And so prior to that discussion regarding stopping by your brother-in-law Brian Albert's house, what, if any, discussion was there in regard to your to his brother Christopher Albert? Let me ask you this. What, if any, other discussion other than going to your brother-in-law Brian Albert's house was there at the table in regard to places to go after?
Yes. There was discussion about going to D&E Pizza. That's a pizza sub shop that Chris Albert owns in Canton Center, which is, 100 yards, whatever, across the street from the Waterfall.
And can you describe sort of what was the substance of that discussion and who was involved in that discussion?
Yes, the discussion is we've done that in the past where we've wrapped up for the night. We've gone over there and turned the ovens on and have made some pizza. In this particular instance, Karen had asked if we could do that. She wanted to go to D&E. She wanted to make pizza. Chris and I were adamant that we were not going to D&E because we were on this diet and we were not going to go subject ourselves to late night pizza. So we said no, we're not going to D&E. Though we had conversations. Karen wanted to go, but we kept saying no, we're not going to go.
When you say you kept saying, was that something that the defendant raised once or more than once?
More than once.
Now, when you leave, you and Mr. Bukhenik, and you walk out of the Waterfall, you go over to your car in the parking lot, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, by your car, I mean your wife Jennifer's car, is that right?
Yes.
And where was she in relation to the car when you get there?
She was already in the car.
So let me ask you the better way, as far as, where was she seated within the car?
Oh, sorry. She was in the driver's seat.
So you get in the front passenger side, is that right?
That's correct.
And when you get into the car, what, if any, communication did you become aware of between your wife and Mr. O'Keefe?
When I got into the vehicle, my wife received a text from John, and it said, "Where to?" I think he was looking for the address. I told my wife we were starting to drive out of the parking lot. I told her just call him instead of texting him back.
So rather than text while she's driving, you advise her just call him back.
Correct.
And did she call him?
She did.
And with respect to that Bluetooth that we were discussing earlier within the car, this call from your wife Jennifer to John O'Keefe, was that using the Bluetooth technology?
I'm assuming it was. I don't recall, but I knew he was on the phone asking what the address was.
Let me ask you this, could you hear both sides of the conversation?
I could hear him, yes.
So you heard your wife talking and you heard John talking, correct?
Yes.
And as far as that communication with reference to where to or where to go or the address, you described to the jury sort of what that conversation consisted of.
Conversation was the address, 34 Fairview, and I actually was definitely mumbling stuff from my seat saying, "Come out, take a right, take a left on Sherman, and 34 Fairview." And that was that initial call, was just giving him the address and telling him to Sherman's easiest way.
And so when you say that initial call, was there a subsequent call while you were still en route to 34 Fairview?
Yes, it was a call a few minutes later. Somehow, I don't know why, but somehow they didn't know where the house was. I recall, again, my assumption would be they'd come from Sherman, from Chapman Street. My wife referenced a friend of Kaylee's who lives off of Fairview. And we said, "Well, you know where this child lives?" He said, "Yes." "Okay, drive past her street and the house will come up on the left."
And the friend of Kaylee's, what was her name?
Her name is Bella.
So someone, do you recall whether it was you or your wife that made reference to Bella's house?
I think we both did. I think I said it, and then I think my wife repeated it.
And that was someone, the Bella child was someone who was friends with both your daughter and with Kaylee, is that correct?
Yes,
Around the same age?
exact, same age, same grade.
Now, when you were talking on this second conversation, again, you could hear both sides of the conversation, is that right?
That's correct.
And as far as Mr. O'Keefe's side of the conversation, what, if anything, did he say as far as who was coming or who he was with at the time?
He didn't make any reference to, you're asking if he made reference of anybody else? Is that what you're asking?
What I'm asking is when he was saying as far as looking for the house, was he
Oh,
saying
we're,
I or
yeah,
we?
we're on our way. Okay, great, we're on our way.
And from, obviously, the earlier interaction that you had with him and him saying we, who did you infer that we to be?
Karen,
And at any point in time during the conversation that you had where you were hearing both sides, did you hear Miss Reed in the background at any point?
I do not recall hearing Miss Reed, no.
Now, about how far a drive is it, how long a drive is it roughly from the Waterfall to 34 Fairview?
The way I would go, 4 minutes, give or take, 5 minutes. There's multiple ways, but depends on how you go, I guess.
And the way that you go, as far as what you're talking about, is that your recollection of how or where your wife drove that night?
Yes.
Now, as far as when you arrive at the house, where did your wife park the vehicle in relation to the house?
She pulled the vehicle into the driveway.
And you're obviously familiar with the address or the residence at 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes, I am.
Been there several times before this evening.
Yes, I have.
And essentially, there's two garage doors on the house. There's one on the left, one on the right. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall whether or not your wife parked on the left side of the driveway or the right side of the driveway?
I believe it was the left, but the driveway is fairly wide. It kind of widens out, not just the two doors. So I don't know if she was right on the left where where the walkway is, or if she was, one kind of more in the middle. Because that driveway, you could pull up even on the right of her, but somewhere, I don't know exactly, but she pulled into the driveway.
So she pulls in the driveway, she parks, you guys go in the house, correct?
Yes.
When you get inside the house, who, if anyone, do you observe there?
When we entered the house, we observed Caitlin, Brian Jr. Brian had two friends there, Julie Nagel and Sarah Levinson, Brian Higgins, and Brian Albert Sr.
And where in
Did
the
I say
house-
Nicole? Nicole, I don't know if I said Nicole.
And where in the house were they situated?
When I recall, everybody was congregated when you walk in the front door, to your right, there's a table, and then there's an open floor where it goes right to the kitchen and the room with the table. They just flow into each other. So people are surrounding either the island in the kitchen and/or the table area.
And from your recollection, is that essentially where people mainly congregated throughout the course of the night that you were there?
Yes.
And about how long a period of time were you there at 34 Fairview that night? Excuse me.
Got there, I'd say a little over an hour. No, got there about 12:20-ish. Left 1:40, 1:40, I don't know the exact time, 1:40, 1:45-ish. So,
You got there somewhere closer to 12:30 and you left somewhere closer to about 1:45, 2 a.m., is that correct?
got there about 12:20, give or take, and then, left about 1:40, 1:45. I don't know the specific time, but somewhere around there.
And similar to the question I asked you about the waterfall, as far as how would you describe sort of the mood or the demeanor of the group in the house when you got there?
Everybody was hanging out. I know Julie was excited. We just showed up. Good to see us. Brian, excited that we came by. Normal.
So, fair to say no tension, no arguments, nothing like that while you were at the house?
No.
And do you recall sort of what you were doing while you were at the house, or what the group was doing?
It kind of hanging out, talking, sitting around the table, engaging. Music was on. Just having a good time, just hanging out, talking, enjoying each other's company. I do recall my wife put on a foolish video that she wanted to show the kids at the table. But other than that, just socially hanging out with each other.
The foolish video that you're talking about, do you recall what that was?
Yes.
And can you describe that to the jury?
It was a video for the song It's Raining Men.
And do you recall, generally speaking, what was in the video, or why it was a foolish video as you described?
Well, it's in the family, it's one of Jen's sisters had put on a show before with an umbrella. So at some point, my wife came across this video, and it was people just dancing around. So she was showing my niece and my nephew and the friends the video so they could see, we're kind of picking on my sister-in-law.
And you have another nephew by the name of, I'm sorry. Are you familiar, you mentioned that earlier at the waterfall there was Christopher and Julie Albert, is that right?
Yes.
Familiar with them, your wife is friends with Julie, correct?
Yes.
And you know their children as well, is that right?
Yes, I do.
And specifically, you know their middle child, Colin?
Yes.
And at any point in time in the evening when you were there at 34 Fairview Road, was Colin Albert there at any point?
No, he was not.
You didn't see him that night at all?
Never saw him.
And obviously, you know your oldest daughter, Allie, correct?
Yes, I do.
And at any point in time when you were at 34 Fairview, did you see her or vehicle or anything? Did you have any knowledge that your daughter Allie was there at the time that you were there?
No, she was not.
She wasn't there, you didn't see her there, you didn't know if she had been there before you or anything like that?
Correct. Correct.
Now, turning back into the house, as far as the group that you were with, was there any point in time that anyone from that group left that sort of general area of the dining room and the kitchen that you recall?
We were in that room. There's a room right next to the kitchen with the doorway that you can walk through. I was seated at the table, but you could walk through the doorway. You know, I know Julie Nagel went into that room because she was looking out the door. Other people could have walked in and out of that room. It's right there, right next to us.
At any point in time over the course of that evening, did you see anybody sort of go upstairs or downstairs to the basement or anywhere else but that general area of those three rooms in the home?
I did not see anybody.
Now, at some point, you mentioned that Julie Nagel was looking outside for something. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And how long was that in reference to after you arrived and then when that happened?
Again, I don't know the exact time. I'm going to say could have been 3 minutes, could have been 5 minutes, somewhere in that vicinity. We arrived, said hello, good to see everybody, and shortly after, she had mentioned that her brother was there to pick her up.
Now, as far as the Levinson and Miss Nagel, they were friends of your nephew, Brian Albert Jr., is that right?
That's correct.
And did you know them at all at that time, you know, when you arrived there on the 28th?
Miss Levinson, I did not know. First time I met her. I definitely had met Julie before. She had, Brian and her hang out. So I definitely met her. I think she's been to I don't know if it was previous to this or after this, but Julie has, helped my nephew Brian, when we go on vacation. We have a dog, and Brian would usually be the go-to to, let the dog out, et cetera. And I know Julie has helped him. I just don't know if that was previous to that or after. But I definitely met Julie before, yes.
So you had met her before, but essentially met her as a friend of your nephew's, correct?
Yes,
Not someone that you knew particularly well, is that fair to say?
correct. Didn't know her well.
So after about 3 to 5 minutes or so after you arrived, you observed Ms. Nagel looking outside, correct?
Yes, she was going out the door, correct.
And do you know why she was going out the door?
She said her brother was there to pick her up, but she didn't want to leave.
And at any point in time, did either yourself or your wife extend an offer to either Ms. Nagel or Ms. Levinson or both in regard to getting home?
Yes. My wife informed them that if they wanted to stay because we just got there, we would be more than willing to drive them home.
And fair to say at this point in time, you didn't even know where Ms. Levinson or Ms. Nagel lived, is that correct?
No idea.
You didn't really know what you signed up for as far as driving them home, is that correct?
Well, Canton's not that big of a town, so I wasn't too scared. But yeah, I didn't know exactly where they live. I knew they were from Canton.
Now, at some point when Ms. Nagel goes outside, what, if anything, drew your attention to the outside of the house?
When she went outside, or when she was opening the door, her or somebody referenced that there was another vehicle out front.
And so, upon hearing that, where did you go?
Upon hearing that, we just assumed that was obviously John and Karen. So I don't recall if I looked out the window first or looked out the door first, but I looked out to see the other vehicle out in front of the house.
And just to be clear, when you say window and when you say door, like which window and which door?
Well, I was sitting at the table, and right behind me is a window. Or if I stood up and took 5 steps, there's the front door of the house. So again,
In addition to sort of the regular front door, is there like a storm door or something that you would have been able to see through? Is that?
that would be the front door, I would call the storm door, that, yes, I could see out the front. There's another door. If you're looking at the house, is your front door, windows, and then there's another door. Julie looked out or went out through that door. I either looked at that point, either looked out the window or walked over to the front door, which would be the opposite door.
So regardless if you looked out the window or you looked out the storm door at the front door, when you looked out, what if anything, did you see?
I noticed the big SUV parked in front of the house.
And do you know what color the SUV was?
At the time, I didn't. It was dark. I didn't know if it was a black SUV, a dark green, or dark blue, but it was a dark SUV.
And at the time, were you familiar with either or both of the vehicles of Mr. O'Keefe and or the defendant, Ms. Reed?
Yes, I knew Karen drove a dark SUV. I didn't know the make and model. I just knew she drove a dark SUV. I'd seen it at pickup and things of that nature.
And did you know what kind of vehicle that Mr. O'Keefe drove around that time?
I think he had a smaller SUV. I don't remember the make.
Do you remember what color
He had
it was?
You know what? I don't remember the color of his SUV. He had another car too that he drove around. I remember that. But that's about it.
And when you're looking out from either the window or the door, where was the dark SUV in relation to the house?
If you came out that front door, pretty much right in front of the house, parked in front of the house.
Now, you mentioned that Ms. Nagel had left the house through the other door and gone outside, is that right?
That's correct.
And when you looked out, could you see Ms. Nagel or where she had gone?
No, there was another vehicle, again, coming out the front door. If you go to the left, there's a driveway. There was another vehicle over there. I don't know if it was on the street facing this way, if it was pulled in. I just looked out the front door and noticed the car to be like, oh, that's John. That was my focus. I didn't look for Julie.
Now, as far as the other vehicle, did you observe at least enough to know whether or not it was behind the dark SUV, in front of the dark SUV, or something else?
Yeah, it was to the left. It was equivalent to where the driveway was. And then after the end of the driveway, there was a Jeep. And after the Jeep was the SUV, the dark SUV.
And with respect to, just from your perspective, you're looking out, so the driveway would have been to your left, is that right?
Correct.
Are you familiar with any other sort of like landmarks or anything else in the front yard area of your brother-in-law's house?
Yes. So you look out, the driveway's to the left. If you look to the right, there is an island of like maybe rhododendrons, something, bushes. There's a flagpole right there. There's a utility. I believe it's a green utility box. I'm assuming it's utility, kind of on the edge. There's a fire hydrant. All that stuff was to the right side of the looking out the front door.
Now, after you look out this initial time, you see this dark SUV sort of right in front of the door. Was that the only time that you looked out, or did you look out on subsequent occasions?
No, I looked out again because it'd been a few minutes. Again, 2, 3, 4 minutes. I'm not sure how long, but it'd been a few minutes, and we thought it was weird they hadn't come into the house. Looked out and saw the SUV again.
And when you looked out for the second time, where was the SUV in relation to where it was the first time?
The SUV had moved up the road from the front of the house. It went from spot A to spot B. Now it's further up, more in sync of where the again the flagpole, the utility box, the fire, more in sync with that. It had moved up the road. Thought it was weird that they hadn't come in.
Now, as far as the times that you're looking out, did you happen to make any note of sort of, let me ask you this, taking you back to the waterfall just for a second. When you were driving, or your wife was driving from the waterfall to 34 Fairview, what, if anything, did you observe as far as what was the weather doing?
The snow had started to fall.
And at that initial time that you're going from the waterfall to Fairview Roads, was it sticking to the pavement or anything at that point?
I believe there was a dusting. It was definitely falling. I don't think it was on like the main roads, but definitely a dusting of snow was falling. Correct.
And from that time after you arrived at the house and shortly thereafter when you observed this dark SUV out in front of the house, had that changed at all as far as the accumulation or sticking to the pavement, roadway, grass, anything like that that you saw?
Yes. At some point, at least on their road in their grass, you could see the snow had started to, it definitely was sticking on that road.
Now, you observe it initially in front of the door, then about 3 or 4 minutes later, you observe it further up towards the flag, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And each of these times, you're not just standing at the door or standing at the window staring out the entire time, correct?
No, just looking out, being like, what the hell are they doing? And going back to my seat.
And at other than those 2 times that you've already testified about, was there any subsequent times after that?
Yes, I definitely looked out a third time out the door.
And the third time that you looked out the door, where was the dark SUV in relation to where it had been the second time?
It had now proceeded further up the road, past the flagpole, past the utility box, past the fire hydrant, more in line with, between the yards, I believe there's bushes and trees that separate the Alberts residence to the next residence. So it was actually past the Alberts residence and a little further up, I'd say more on the edge of the property line of the, if you're looking out of the neighbors to their right, if I'm looking out of their house.
Now, this distance between the second time that you saw it and the third time that you saw it, do you have any idea about how much distance that was or how many feet?
Hey, I'd be guessing 30, 40 feet. I don't know. I have no idea. I'd have to measure it.
Now, with respect to the snow that had fallen on the ground, as far as the vehicle was concerned, it moves from one point to the second point to the third point. Do you observe any sort of tire marks or anything in the snow out on the road when you looked out?
Yes, I did.
And the tire marks that you observed, did they essentially lead up to the back tires of the dark SUV that you saw out there?
At some point, I looked out and noticed tire marks that would have started before the Jeep. So if the Jeep was here, so where it's just a weird, like a wave. There was a weird wave in the road. You could see the tire marks.
And was that before or after? So at some point, Ms. Nagel goes out to some other vehicle and then comes back inside the house, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You know about how long she was outside of the house for?
I'd be guessing a minute. I'm not sure.
Just not terribly long time?
No, not at all.
And so the time that you observed this sort of abnormality in the tire marks that you see out there, was that before or after she had come back inside the house?
That would have been after.
So you don't know if that was from the dark SUV or whatever vehicle she had met. You have no idea.
Objection.
No, can you answer that? Well, the form of the question, it's sustained then.
Do you know which vehicle left those abnormal tire marks you saw?
Based off of where the tire marks were, they came off the curb. My assumption was it was the SUV.
I withdraw.
Okay,
I heard the answer. I withdraw.
okay.
But you don't know, correct?
No, I didn't see no.
And that was my next point. As far as when you saw the vehicle, as far as each of those 3 times, it was stationary each time you saw it, correct?
The first 2 times, definitely stationary. The third time looked stationary. If it was going a half mile per hour, I'm not sure, but it was further up the road. It looked to me it was stationary, but like I said, if for some reason it was moving, it could have been moving. But
Now, each time that you saw the vehicle, was it in the same sort of position with respect to the house? By that I mean, as far as was it on the Alberts, was it on the 34 Fairview side of the road or the other side, or where was it positioned with respect to the roadway?
yes, same position, parked parallel to the Alberts house, heading forward as if you were going to leave Fairview to head up to Chapman Street, heading away from the house.
And so each time that you observed the vehicle, you were looking at sort of the passenger side of that vehicle, correct?
That is correct.
And at any point in time, either of these 3 occasions that you observed the vehicle, did you see anybody outside of it?
I did not.
Did you see any footprints around the vehicle or leading away from the vehicle or across the yard or anything like that?
I did not.
And were you able to see inside of the vehicle from where you were, either from the window or from the storm door or the front door?
I could not, or I did not see anything inside.
And further to that point, at any point in time that you observed this vehicle in front of the house, you see any sort of interior lights on inside the vehicle?
Not that I noticed.
Now, you saw it at point 1, point 2, point 3. Were there any other times that you looked outside?
I'm assuming I looked out because at some point the vehicle was gone. So I must have looked out one more time because there was no vehicle there anymore. And again, I don't know if I just peeked out the window and said, oh, they left. Again, we didn't know where they were.
And do you know whether or not there had been any attempt at communication by anyone in the house to Mr. O'Keefe at any point?
Yes.
And who was doing that?
My wife was trying to communicate with John, letting him know that he's here. So,
I'm gonna let that stand.
And at any point, do you know whether or not Mr. O'Keefe communicated back to Ms. McCabe while they were out front of the house?
Objection.
Do you know? Not how you know, do you know?
do I know if Mr. O'Keefe communicated back to Jen? Is that the question?
That's my question.
No.
No, she did not, or no, you don't know?
Oh, no, sorry, no, she did not, sorry.
Right, I'll strike that.
Now, Ms. McCabe, with regard to this, from the first time that you sort of get up and either look out the window or look out the door and see it in front of the front door, to the time that you look out and see it for the third time, or let me ask you this, from the time that you see it in front of the door to the time that you see that there's no vehicle there anymore, do you know how long a period of time that was?
I'd say at least 10 minutes, could be 12, 13, 14. I don't know the exact time, but it was out there for a little bit.
And so, let me ask it this way, as far as from the first time to the second time, you have testified it was about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, somewhere in there, correct?
Correct.
Were the timing in between the times that you looked out, were they relatively consistent with each other?
Yes, they were.
So you look out 3 or 4 minutes, look out again, 3 or 4 minutes, look out again, is that?
Yes, that would be in line. Correct.
And at some point around 1:45 or 2 a.m., somewhere in there is when you leave Fairview Road, is that correct?
Yes,
Do you recall who drove your wife's vehicle home that night?
I drove.
And who, if anyone else, was in the vehicle, and where were they seated within the vehicle when you left?
So we were driving Sarah Levinson and Julie Nagel home. They were in the back seat of the vehicle, and my wife was in the passenger seat. I don't know who sat behind the passenger, who sat behind the driver, but they were in the back seats.
Your Honor, if at this time, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish for the jury and for this witness Exhibits 71, 72, and 73.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 71 first. And so, Ms. McCabe, on the desk in front of you, there should be a laser pointer there. If you just click that button and point at the screen, if when I or anyone asks you to do so. First, just with reference to what's up on the screen as Exhibit 71, do you recognize what that is, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize?
34 Fairview.
And absent some of the snowfall, obviously, is this essentially what the house looked like on that early morning of January 29th?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you could, with relation to the window first, and then the storm door that you were talking about, that you were looking out from the house, could you, using the laser pointer, show the jury where that is?
Is that working? That would be the window. That'd be the storm door.
And with respect to the first placement, the first time that you look out and see the dark SUV in front of the house, is that visible in this photograph?
Wait, can you repeat that? Sorry.
First time that you look out and you see the dark SUV in front of the house, is that position, is that visible in this photograph?
I'd probably catch the very back end because there was a Jeep parked right here, so it'd be right there.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 72. Again, sir, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yep,
It's another photograph of the residence of 34 Fairview, is that correct?
yes.
If you could, using that laser pointer, could you show the jury or demonstrate to the jury where that vehicle was the first time that you saw it?
Say right about here, in this general area.
The second positioning that you were talking about, is that visible in this photograph?
No, it'd be further up the road.
So Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 73. Can you recognize what's depicted now in Exhibit 73?
Yes, I do.
And that secondary position that you observed the vehicle in is visible in this photograph.
Yes, it is.
So if you could, sir, just direct the jury's attention to where about that was.
About in this general area right here.
And the third positioning that you saw the vehicle in, can you describe where that was?
Yep, it'd be further up the road. I'd say, give or take, right there.
Okay. And so, sir, you leave the residence of 34 Fairview. Do you recall, as far as the weather was concerned, what was the weather, what, if anything, had changed between the times that you were booked out and the time that you came out to go home?
The snow was starting to accumulate.
So the storm was starting to pick up a bit, is that correct?
That is correct.
And when you came out of the house, the vehicle was in the driveway, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And again, if you could, you're driving, who else is in the car and where are they in the car?
I'm in the driver's seat. My wife is in the passenger seat, and Julie and Sarah are in the seats directly behind us.
Do you recall who was seated where?
I don't recall who was in what seat.
And you back out of the driveway and then you go, do you recall where you were going or who you were dropping off first?
Yes, I back out of the driveway and proceed, heading up towards Chapman Street.
And so would the passenger side of the wife's vehicle, would that be facing closest to 34 Fairview at the time that you're driving away from it?
Yes, that's correct.
And your testimony as far as the storm picking up a little bit, do you recall anything did you have to clear off the car, or windshield wipers on, or anything like that in reference to the weather?
Yes, I brushed the car off. I had to wipe the car off with my hand and clean off the windows before I pulled out of the driveway. And then obviously setting the windshield wipers as I was driving away.
Now, that area over where the secondary position that you observed that dark SUV in over by the flagpole, do you recall any sort of like street lighting or anything, ambient overhead lighting in that area?
I don't recall it, no.
As you're driving away from the house, do you recall whether or not was there any conversation or music playing or anything like that in the car as you're driving away?
Yeah, it was chitter chatter. You know, my wife was turned towards me, like turned in, talking to the girls behind me. I know at one point somebody was joking about, I don't know, peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something. Something about bread. I forget what it was. And then I drove up the street.
And as you were driving up the street and away from the residence at Fairview, what, if anything, did you observe abnormal on the side of the road? Were you looking at the side of the road?
I was not. I was focusing on the snow coming down, the windshield wipers, and driving up the street.
And fair to say you didn't see anything in the yard or anything like that?
That's correct.
So you drove each of the two young ladies home, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you know about what time it was that you got home yourself?
I got home, give or take, somewhere between after 2:10, 2:15-ish. I don't know the exact time, but somewhere in that vicinity.
And when you got home, each of your four daughters, including Allie, were they all home at that point?
The kids were home, correct.
And when you arrive in the house, you and your wife, where did you see?
Well, first went in the kitchen. When we walked in, my wife proceeded upstairs before I did. I was in the kitchen for a few minutes and then went upstairs and went to bed.
did your wife go to bed around the same time as you?
Yes, she might have already been laying in bed before I physically got in the bed, but yes.
And as far as you, well, when you fell asleep, was your wife still awake, or had she already fallen asleep?
She was still awake. We were both awake. She actually wanted to watch a show, which I had no desire to watch, and she said I was going to bed. We talked a little bit about my younger daughter, about she was trying out for a basketball team, so we talked a little bit about that, and then that was it. I went to bed.
Turning your attention to the morning of the 29th, the morning of the 29th. You woke up at some point, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what, if anything, do you recall, sort of what woke you up that morning?
I woke up to screams in my bedroom.
All right, may we approach just briefly?
Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Where left off yesterday, you had gone to bed on the 28th, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Friday night.
And at some point you woke up on the later in the morning on the 29th, correct?
Yes, Saturday morning.
And do you recall, sir, what awoke you on that morning?
Yes, I do.
What was that, sir?
I awoke to the screaming of, "Jen, Jen, Jen." So when I woke up, I thought there was somebody in my bedroom. I kind of snapped up out of bed. What the hell's going on? Looking around the room, realized my wife was actually on the phone.
And the screaming that you heard, how loud was that, sir?
It was loud enough to wake me up from a dead sleep. I could hear it. It was loud. Obviously, I was laying in bed and realizing after my wife was laying right next to me on the phone. But it was a loud, "Jen, Jen, Jen." It was repetitive.
And do you know approximately what time that was, sir?
Yeah, shortly before 5 a.m.
And did you recognize the voice that you heard scream?
I did not recognize the voice.
And as far as that phone conversation went on for, well, let me ask you this first. As far as that phone conversation was concerned, could you hear both sides of that conversation?
Yes, I could.
And that was based on the volume of the person speaking on the other end, correct?
Correct.
And eventually, were you able to recognize or identify the voice on the other end of your wife's conversation?
Yes, I asked my wife, what the hell is going on? After I woke up and popped up, looking around the room to find out who's in my bedroom, assuming it was a kid, one of my kids screaming. I asked my wife, what is going on? And I could hear her saying, "I'm on the phone with Karen. She can't find John."
And from the course of that conversation continued while you were in your bedroom, is that correct?
Yeah, that conversation continued for a couple minutes. I could hear the dialogue, and then again, right back to "Jen, Jen, Jen," the repeating of my wife's name again.
And as far as the dialogue was concerned, specifically from the defendant, Ms. Reed's perspective, what, if anything, do you recall about that?
She didn't know where John was, and the last time she saw him was at the Waterfall.
And about how long did that initial phone call or that initial conversation between your wife and the defendant go on for?
From when I woke up, minute and a half, 2 minutes, I don't know the exact time.
And after,
Give or take.
Do you recall how that conversation ended? Did your wife hang up or?
Yes, they hung up the phone. I was laying in the bed. My wife was next to me. And I think my wife immediately called somebody else, was calling friends that lived near the waterfall that happened to be out that evening. And she started making those phone calls.
And as your wife was making those phone calls, what, if anything, did you say to her?
Objection.
What, if anything, did he say to her?
Yes.
To,
No, I'm not going to let you testify to that. Next question.
With respect to the defendant's statement that the last time she saw the Mr. O'Keefe was at the Waterfall, what if anything occurred to you in reference to that?
In reference to her saying she last saw him at the Waterfall, I then told my wife, "What are you talking about?"
So I'll not what you said, sir, but I think Mr. Lally asked you what you thought, or what you gathered from that.
I thought she was crazy
And why was that?
because I saw her vehicle. I saw the black SUV arrive to the 34 Fairview that morning.
You had overheard the conversation from Mr. O'Keefe to your wife the night previous, correct?
That's correct.
And so what happened then?
I told my wife, "What are you talking about?" She was at,
It's not what you said to your wife.
All right, sorry.
It's hard. Ask the question, Mr. Lally, so that he can answer it properly.
So your wife made some phone calls in your presence, correct?
yes, she did.
And following those phone conversations, what if any other conversations did she have with the defendant that morning?
There were multiple calls. I don't recall what calls were made, what time, but the next call, we were informing the defendant that, "Wait, we saw your car. We saw you come to 34 Fairview. You guys were there." And I heard the response of, "I don't remember. I don't remember going there."
And what if any other conversation do you recall in those subsequent phone conversations that you overheard from the defendant?
At some moment, as I said, my wife had made a couple phone calls. In one of the calls with Karen Reed, she blurted that she broke her taillight, cracked her taillight, something to that effect, while Jen and I were still in the bedroom and she was on the phone.
And as your wife and you were in the bedroom and your wife is on the phone, what if anything were the two of you doing?
After my wife had made a few calls, we were completely confused on where the hell John was. The thought process in our head at that moment was we knew that John had mentioned that he was potentially going to be meeting up with another person. So we called that individual, my wife called that individual to see if by chance, again, confused, left at the Waterfall. We saw them at the house. Did John not go with her? What happened? Did he get out of the car? Did he go somewhere else? So we proceeded to call a couple other people that we thought he possibly might have met up with, or another individual.
From those other phone calls that you observed your wife making at any point in time, other than her conversations with the defendant, did you observe her to have any conversation with anybody?
You're asking if my wife did?
What I'm asking is not to any content or anything like that, but your wife made phone calls, correct?
That is correct.
And when she made those phone calls, did you observe her conversing with anybody on the phone?
No, she did not speak to anybody. Nobody answered any of our calls.
And at some point, did you yourself reach out to Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I did.
And how did you do that?
I know I texted him, and I think I called him as well. Pretty much, "Where the hell are you?" I think it was when Karen Reed and my wife were leaving my house. I think I responded, "Where the hell are you? Now Karen and Jen are out looking for you."
And in regard to those text messages, did you receive any response from Mr. O'Keefe?
I did not.
And with regard to those texts, you had Mr. O'Keefe programmed into your phone, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you had had prior conversations with him via text message and phone using that number that you had programmed into your phone?
Yes.
So no response to the text. As far as the phone call that you placed to Mr. O'Keefe, did he answer? Did you speak with him at all?
I did not speak to Mr. O'Keefe.
Now, at some point, do you and your wife proceed downstairs?
My wife proceeded downstairs. I remained in the bedroom.
And what is the next thing that you remember occurring that morning?
While I was getting dressed, I put my jeans on. My wife went downstairs. She was going to make a coffee. My wife and I were proceeding to leave. We were going to leave our house and make a drive to the house of the gentleman that my wife was calling that we possibly thought John could have met up with. And within that moment, again, I don't know the exact time, I then heard yelling out in my front yard.
And when you heard the yelling in your front yard, where did you go?
I realized it was Karen Reed, and I told my wife to please tell her to shut up. She's going to wake up the whole neighborhood.
And where is this, or when is this in relation to that first phone call when you sort of shoot up out of bed?
At least a half hour, give or take. Again, I don't know the exact time.
Now, at any point after you hear the yelling out front, you hear the defendant yelling out front, what was she yelling at that point?
She, again, repeated, Jen, Jen. She, for some reason, kept repeating my wife's name. I don't know if she got all the way to my doorway or my wife walked out, but my wife had said, I was actually relieved because I was like, not thinking what happened to John happened to John. I was thinking he was on somebody's couch. So I was like, good, I'm not going to look for him, thinking my wife was going to go. My wife said she's going to go with Karen to go find John.
And at any point in time that morning when the defendant arrived at the house, did you actually go outside or look outside? Or?
I did not go outside. I did look out the blinds of my bedroom window, which is the closest to the driveway.
What, if anything, did you see when you looked out the blinds?
Saw Karen's car in my driveway.
Did you see the defendant, Ms. Reed, anywhere outside as well?
I don't recall physically seeing her. I saw the vehicle. I don't recall seeing her directly, making any physical contact as far as seeing her.
Now, what, if any, concerns that you have in reference to your wife going out with Ms. Reed at that particular time?
I had mentioned to my wife before she was leaving the house that
No, I'll allow this.
That-
What were your concerns?
my concerns were she was going to be driving with Miss Reed in their vehicle, in Miss Reed's vehicle, and my concerns were that she had a broken taillight. What I thought by a broken taillight was that her taillight was out, meaning there was no light. And I didn't think it was a bright idea to be driving around with no physical light on the taillight.
Particularly given the weather, is that fair to say?
Because of the weather, correct.
And so your wife then leaves with Ms. Reed, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you happen to see like who got in where as far as the car, who was driving when they left?
I did not see that, no.
Now, was that within the same time frame that you were describing before, about a half hour after you hear the initial call?
Yes, from Miss Reed arriving at my house was, yes, half hour or so after the initial call, and it wasn't long after before they proceeded to leave.
Now, at this time that you're looking out from the blinds and you see the defendant's car and the defendant outside, was it light out? Was it dark out? What are we talking about?
It was dark out.
And so they leave in your home with the 4 children, correct?
That is correct.
And when was the next time that you spoke to your wife?
The next time I spoke to my wife was an hour later. I received a phone call from her. I don't know the exact time, but I'm going to say about an hour or so.
And without reference to much of the content of that, all I'm really asking for is what, if any, indication did she give you as to where she was?
She indicated they found John and at Fairview.
And upon receiving that information, where did you go?
I proceeded to finish getting dressed and drove over to Fairview.
And when you got to Fairview, what, if anything, did you see when you arrived?
When I got to Fairview, I had come down through the Chapman Street entrance, and as I proceeded down the hill towards the Albert residence, I noticed all the first responders, fire engine, et cetera, police cars, and I realized I was not going to be able to get to the Albert residence because it was all blocking the street. So I backtracked, turned around, went back up Fairview to the top, to Chapman, took a left, and took a left down Spring Lane, which is a parallel street to Fairview, and came down Spring Lane to Cedar Crest onto Fairview so I could get to the Albert household.
Now, during your drive from your home over to Fairview and doing all that sort of turning around and coming back around the other way through Cedar Crest, what were the roads like?
It was snowing, careful driving.
And the snowing that you observed that morning when you drove from your house to Fairview, what was that like in relation to the snowing that you observed when you were driving home from Fairview hours before?
Much thicker snow, much more snow on the ground, much more snow to wipe off my car. And again, I had to drive slow.
Now, when you come around to sort of the other side, as far as the first responders, you mentioned police cruisers and a fire truck, is that right?
Yeah, there might have been an ambulance there as well, but yes.
Do you recall specifically seeing an ambulance?
I do recall seeing an ambulance. I don't know if I saw it when I came down or if I saw it when I eventually parked the car, but I do recall seeing an ambulance.
And when you parked the car, where did you go?
I proceeded on to Fairview and I parked the car along the side of the road because there was another vehicle in front of me. I believe the other vehicle might have been blocking the driveway, but there was another vehicle right on the side of the road as well.
Now, in addition to the other vehicles as far as cruisers, fire truck, or whatever from first responders, what, if any, other vehicles or who, if anyone else, did you see outside the house? It ended up being Kerry Roberts' vehicle was parked as I was at the driveway. Ford Explorer, I think it was. And again, without any reference to the content of the conversation, did you have any conversation with Ms. Roberts at that time?
Yes, I did.
Did you know Ms. Roberts at that time?
I knew who she was. Didn't really have a relationship with her, but I knew who she was.
And how did you know who she was?
Friends through the town. She did live in the Ponkapog neighborhood, though I believe she moved in and we moved out shortly after. I don't know the actual time period. Her kids were a couple of years younger. One was 1 year younger than my child, so I knew who her child was through being the grade beneath my youngest child through soccer.
And just to be clear, when you talk about the Ponkapog neighborhood, that's where you used to live on Sutcliffe and where Mr. O'Keefe used to live in the house that was the fur pusher's house.
Yes, that's correct.
So then, after your conversation with Ms. Roberts, about how long was that conversation?
Oh, that was a brief conversation. She informed me that she was going to pick up the, she informed me Karen was going, she was dropping Karen off back at the house. She was going to the hospital and she was going to pick up John's parents in Braintree. I told her I would come with her to pick up the parents. Like I said, the road conditions were pretty bad. And, just for safety reasons, I thought I would go with her, help her go pick up the parents. She informed me that Jen was in the house. Jen is waiting to be interviewed by the police.
So where did you go from there?
I then proceeded to the front door of 34 Fairview.
And when you got inside, who, if anyone, was inside when you got there?
When I got to the front door, it was my wife, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and Officer Lank.
And when you came in, can you describe, starting with your wife, Jennifer McCabe, can you describe her demeanor when you first came into the house?
Shocked. Just, face was drawn, just kind of in awe. All three of them were just looking like, with a drawn face of, I'm walking and going, what the hell is going on?
And just to be clear, by all three of them, you mean your wife, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert?
Correct.
And just turning back briefly to the phone conversation that you had from your wife, which led you to come over to Fairview in the first place, how would you describe her demeanor on that phone call as well?
Matt, we found John at Fairview. It was a quick conversation. I didn't get any details.
Now, at some point, while you were at the house, did you speak to, you mentioned Officer Lank was there, is that correct?
That's correct.
Recall if there was any other officers in the house at that time or at any later time?
At that moment, it was just Officer Lank at that moment. Other officers came in the house a little later, but at that moment, it was just Officer Lank.
And at some point, while you were at the house, did you have any conversation, or what, if any, conversation did you have with Officer Lank or any other officer?
Yes, Officer Lank asked me to step outside, and we spoke briefly. He asked me about if I knew what happened to John. Obviously, I told him no. I had no idea. I'm just finding out right now. He asked me when I last saw John. I told him I saw him at the Waterfall. We saw him at the bar. We hadn't seen him. I believe, again, heat of the moment, I believe I said we saw his vehicle out front, but we never saw John.
Now, at the house on Fairview, about how long were you there that morning?
I'm gonna say, give her at least 4 hours
From the time that you got there?
from the time I got there, yes.
And where did you go from there?
When I left Fairview, I went back to my house on Jen and I's house, home.
As your children were still there, is that correct?
My children were all there, correct.
And at some point after you arrived home, who, if anyone else, as far as police officers or anybody like that, came to your home that day?
Two Mass State police officers came to my house.
And did you speak with those officers?
Yes, I did.
Troopers from the state police, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as far as the troopers that you spoke to, do you recall what their names were?
Yes, Trooper Michael Proctor and Trooper Yuri Bukhenik, if I said it right.
Probably closer than. Now, on that date of January 29th, 2022, had you met either Trooper Proctor or Trooper Bukhenik before?
I had never met them.
And where did they speak with you in the house?
Well, they first came in the house and informed me they were going to interview my wife and asked me to leave the room. I went up to my bedroom.
And at some point, did they interview you as well?
Yes, they did.
And where was your wife when they interviewed you?
I'm assuming, I think she wasn't in the room with me. I think she went upstairs. As I said, my kids were home. I don't know if she went in the kids' bedroom to kind of wake them up. And I don't know what she was
in
doing.
the room when they interviewed you, correct?
No, she was not.
And in addition to the troopers that came over to your house, did your brother-in-law, Brian Albert, did he come over at any point in time around this?
Yes, he did.
And if you know, did he speak with those troopers as well?
Yes, he did.
And where were you and your wife when the two troopers were speaking to Mr. Albert?
I was still upstairs in the bedroom.
Your wife, where was she?
She might have come up and seen me, but I think she might have went in the girls' bedroom. I don't recall if we were standing in the same room. I think she might have went in my daughter's bedroom. Again, my kids were starting, it was, I don't know the exact time, 12 o'clock, give or take. So, time to wake up.
So the troopers, when they were speaking to Brian Albert Sr., they were in the downstairs area of the home?
Yes, they were.
And both you and your wife were upstairs?
Yes, that's my recollection.
Now, turning your attention to a couple days later, did you speak with any other troopers from the state?
I did. I only remember the first name of one of them. It was a man and a woman. I just remember Connor something. I don't know their names.
And where did that conversation occur?
I was in my first floor dining room table.
And do you know if those same two troopers that came on a subsequent date spoke with your wife as well?
Yes, they did.
and sort of same arrangement as far as where you were and where she was at the time that you spoke with those two troopers?
Yes, that's correct.
Just briefly, sir. So, describing your wife's demeanor, you described her to sort of be in shock. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you seen your wife display that kind of demeanor before, or have you seen your wife in sort of crisis mode over the course of your relationship and your marriage?
I've seen her in crisis mode. I would call it crisis mode as well in the past.
And sort of typically, how would you describe how she handles situations like that, or what her demeanor is in those types of situations?
She is very calm, very calm.
And when, just so it's clear for the jury, so when you're talking about sort of prior incidents in regard to sort of crisis modes, what types of scenarios or what types of incidents are we talking about?
Well, allow it.
Previous deaths of my parents, my brother. She's the one that can get in the room, sit, relax, hold their hand, make them feel comfortable. She's much more. I can't do that. She's much more. So she's done that with my family, and she's also done that with our neighbor.
Nothing further. Thank you, sir.
All right, Ms. Giannetti?
Thank you, Your Honor.